What if the world's deadliest men never pulled a trigger? One trafficked weapons into wars you've never heard of. The other wired millions to terrorists without leaving his office. They didn't start wars. They just made sure they never ended. This is the true story of Viktor Bout and Ayman Joumaa. Two ghosts in the system, two faces of a world powered by shadows. They never fired a weapon, but thousands died because of them. They never stood on a battlefield, yet entire regions collapsed in their wake. One flew cargo planes packed with assault rifles into war zones. The other moved millions of dollars through ghost companies, fueling terror without a single bullet fired. Viktor Bout and Ayman Joumaa, two names that rarely make headlines, yet they've shaped modern conflict from behind the curtain. Viktor Bout, born in Soviet-era Tajikistan, rose from a former military translator and cargo pilot to become one of the world's most prolific arms traffickers. After the fall of the USSR, while others scrambled to survive the chaos, Bout saw opportunity in its ruins. Soviet stockpiles of military-grade weapons, AK-47s, RPGs, mortars, were left unsecured, untracked, and ripe for the taking. By the mid-1990s, Bout had transformed these leftovers of a dead empire into a private arms empire of his own, using a fleet of aging Antonov and Ilyushin aircraft to supply weapons into active conflict zones. Between 1996 and 2003, United Nations reports tied Bout's network to arms deliveries in Liberia, Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, and Sierra Leone. He didn't just sell weapons, he sold access, logistics, and impunity. The scale was staggering. For instance, in one shipment to Liberia, Bout delivered over 200 tons of weapons, including AK-47s, Dragunov sniper rifles, PKM machine guns, RPG-7 launchers, and millions of rounds of ammunition, all in violation of UN sanctions. He supplied all sides, loyal to no flag. Where there was war, there was profit. Ayman Joumaa operated in silence. No aircraft, no cargo runs. His battlefield was financial. A dual Lebanese-Colombian national, Joumaa built a money laundering empire stretching from South America to the Middle East. U.S. Treasury investigations allege he cleaned over $200 million per month, mainly from drug profits of the Mexican Los Zetas cartel, through used car businesses, wire transfers, and fake invoices. But this wasn't just criminal finance, it was geopolitical. Authorities tracked millions of those laundered dollars flowing into Hezbollah's accounts, linking Joumaa directly to the financial backbone of one of the most powerful militant organizations in the Middle East. While Bout was captured in a DEA sting in Thailand in 2008 and sentenced to 25 years in the US, Joumaa remains at large. Both are, or were, at the center of global criminal networks. But they represent two distinct archetypes, the warlord merchant and the invisible banker, guns versus money, destruction versus control. Viktor Bout didn't rely on secrecy, he thrived in plain sight. He registered companies across the globe, Belgium, the United Arab Emirates, South Africa, all seemingly legitimate air freight businesses. But behind these corporate facades was a well-oiled system capable of delivering crates of weapons to countries under arms embargoes, often under the cover of humanitarian aid or mining equipment. His fleet included more than 50 aircraft, many of them heavy-duty Soviet models like the Antonov An-12 and Ilyushin Il-76, ideal for flying into remote or rugged war zones where few dared to land. Bout's shipments weren't small-scale. In 2001, a single flight to Liberia carried over 10,000 rifles, 3,000 machine guns, and ammunition by the ton. His model was built for volume, fast, dirty, and deniable. He used forged end-user certificates, shell companies, and bribes to navigate global customs systems. Each step was a calculated move, not a chaotic operation. He didn't just sell weapons, he delivered capability, the tools of power to warlords, dictators, and insurgents who could pay. But what truly set Bout apart was his adaptability. When UN sanctions hit hard, he shifted operations. When a cargo plane was impounded, another was already in the air. He wasn't ideologically driven. Bout didn't care who won a war, only that it continued. Conflict, for him, was a business cycle. The more chaos, the higher the demand. His emotional detachment from the consequences of his trade made him not just dangerous, but untouchable for years. Ayman Joumaa, in contrast, worked in shadows Bout rarely entered. He didn't move guns, he moved money, and he did it with surgical precision. His network, based in Lebanon, Colombia, and West Africa, specialized in laundering hundreds of millions of dollars through front businesses, including used car dealerships and import-export firms. Joumaa's model capitalized on the US dollar's global reach and the weak enforcement mechanisms in countries struggling with corruption. In 2011, the US Department of the Treasury identified Joumaa as the head of a network laundering drug money through a scheme known as the Black Market Peso Exchange. Cocaine profits from Los Zetas and Colombian cartels were converted into merchandise, cars, electronics, construction materials, which were then shipped to Africa and the Middle East. Profits from those sales were funneled back to cartel operatives and Hezbollah affiliates, effectively completing a financial circle that spanned 5 continents. Joumaa didn't just provide financial services, he structured entire systems. His use of layered transactions, multiple currencies, and banks in high-risk jurisdictions allowed him to operate undetected for years. And unlike Bout, who was arrested in a high-profile sting, Joumaa remains a phantom, indicted by the US, sanctioned, pursued, but never caught. This absence only amplifies his threat, an operator who understands not just how to exploit the system, but how to stay invisible within it. Psychologically, their profiles diverge sharply. Bout, with a military background and a logistical obsession, often spoke of his business like a freight company executive. He viewed weapons as cargo and war zones as markets. His dispassion was chilling. Joumaa's world was colder still. He didn't deal with death directly, but his financial ecosystem sustained criminal organizations that thrived on violence. He enabled, sustained, and expanded their reach, not with bullets, but with balance sheets. One sells chaos in crates, the other wires it silently across borders. Yet both understood something most governments didn't. The global black market isn't built on ideology or brute force. It's built on loopholes, logistics, and people willing to profit from pain. Viktor Bout's operations didn't just shift weapons from one place to another. They altered the course of conflicts, prolonged civil wars, and enabled mass atrocities. According to a 2003 United Nations panel, Bout's arms trafficking was directly linked to war crimes in Sierra Leone and Angola. In Liberia, his deliveries empowered the Charles Taylor regime, whose forces used child soldiers and committed brutal massacres. These weren't incidental consequences. They were predictable outcomes of supplying unstable regimes with military-grade firepower. In total, Bout's network moved thousands of tons of weaponry across at least 4 continents. His cargo included over 100,000 AK-47s, hundreds of surface-to-air missiles, and even helicopters, depending on the buyer's request. One shipment to Rwanda in the late 1990s included 6,000 assault rifles, 4,000 grenades, and 1.5 million rounds of ammunition, a volume large enough to arm a brigade. Bout enabled non-state actors and sanctioned governments alike to fight longer, harder, and bloodier. While international embargoes sought to contain violence, Bout's system found the cracks and widened them. His role wasn't peripheral, it was structural. He became the critical supplier for conflicts otherwise limited by international restrictions. By 2005, Western intelligence sources estimated that his fleet had flown over 1,000 missions, some into war zones where international carriers refused to operate. He was less a gun runner and more a private military logistics empire. Ayman Joumaa's impact, though less visible, was no less destructive. His network helped cleanse dirty money from some of the world's most violent drug operations. The US DEA linked him directly to the Los Zetas cartel, a group responsible for mass killings, dismemberments, and political assassinations in Mexico. Joumaa's laundering pipeline didn't just preserve cartel wealth, it allowed them to expand operations, bribe officials, and purchase more sophisticated weapons. In this sense, money was ammunition, and Joumaa supplied it at industrial scale. Between 2007 and 2011, U.S. investigations estimated that Joumaa laundered at least $850 million, with much of it passing through seemingly innocuous businesses in West Africa and the Middle East. His profits didn't stop at the drug trade. They bled into political militancy. Hezbollah, identified by the U.S. and others as a terrorist group, reportedly received millions from Joumaa's laundering system. That money helped fund training camps, arms acquisitions, and political operations across Lebanon, Syria, and beyond. Whereas Bout fueled physical warfare, Joumaa ensured the financial sustainability of ideological and criminal violence. The danger in comparing the two lies in their invisibility. Bout was eventually caught, his downfall the result of a DEA undercover operation in Bangkok, where he agreed to sell surface-to-air missiles to men posing as FARC rebels. Joumaa, by contrast, has never faced arrest. Indicted in absentia in 2011, he disappeared from public view. That silence, that ghostly absence, is itself a form of power. It suggests a deeper network, better protection, or simply more skill in disappearing. Either way, his continued freedom sustains the global shadow economy. Experts have tried to rank their threat levels, but the comparison is difficult. Bout disrupted regions overnight. His arms shipments could escalate a conflict within days. Joumaa's influence spread slowly, but was no less lethal. Over years, he built financial arteries that sustained entire networks of violence. One delivered the tools of war. The other funded the system that manufactures war. And while their methods differed, their legacies are intertwined, measured in bodies, broken systems, and the near-total failure of borders to stop them. Long after Viktor Bout was extradited to the United States and sentenced to 25 years in prison, his logistics model remained intact. Planes changed hands. Companies dissolved and reappeared under new names. The infrastructure he built, layered, opaque, and transnational, proved more durable than the man himself. Even his arrest didn't shut it down. It merely scattered it. Smaller operators picked up the pieces, adapting his techniques. Bout became a blueprint. In 2022, he was exchanged in a high-profile prisoner swap with Russia, returning home a free man. His release was not just a diplomatic maneuver, it was symbolic. It reminded the world that men like Bout aren't just criminals, they're political assets, ghosts of geopolitical shifts, and tools in state-to-state bargaining. That blurred line between outlaw and instrument is precisely what makes figures like him so dangerous. When a trafficker becomes negotiable, it means the system itself is complicit, or at least willing to compromise. Ayman Joumaa's legacy is harder to trace, and that is exactly the problem. He has not been captured. His current location is unknown. His laundering routes, involving banks in Africa, car dealerships in the US, trade channels across Latin America, may have morphed, but the architecture of his network still exists. The methods he used have been replicated by other networks. The DEA and US Treasury have issued new reports citing similar schemes, but with different names at the helm. Like financial DNA, Joumaa's systems mutated but didn't die. What both men represent is a new era of global criminality, one that doesn't rely on brute force, but on mobility, legal ambiguity, and the fragility of international coordination. They operated across dozens of jurisdictions, none of which had the full picture. Each layer of their operations was legal, or appeared to be, when viewed in isolation. It was only in composite that the crimes became visible. That's not just clever logistics or finance. It's structural exploitation of how globalization works. Comparing the two isn't about determining who is worse. It's about recognizing two archetypes in a system that rewards different kinds of ruthlessness. Bout industrialized war through physical goods. Joumaa sustained it through financial abstraction. One delivered destruction on pallets, the other wired it silently, through code and currency. Both destabilized entire regions, and both did it without ever stepping onto a battlefield. What's most alarming is that neither of them needed mass armies or sophisticated ideologies. They needed loopholes, shell companies, planes no one tracked, banks that didn't ask questions. And as long as those vulnerabilities exist, so will others like them. Operators without borders, men who turn conflict into currency. For audiences listening today, their stories offer more than intrigue. They offer a warning. The next Viktor Bout may not be Russian. The next Ayman Joumaa may not touch a single dollar. They may use crypto, smart contracts, shipping containers, or satellite comms. But the pattern will be the same. They'll find the cracks, and they'll walk right through them. Because the world isn't just at risk of more crime. It's at risk of becoming a place where crime, in forms like this, simply becomes part of how the world works. Not an exception, a feature. And in that future, what matters most may not be the weapons we see, but the systems we fail to notice. Two men, two methods, one world increasingly shaped by people we never see. Viktor Bout showed us how war could be delivered like cargo. Ayman Joumaa proved that terror could be financed like a business. And the scariest part, they're not the only ones. If this is how crime operates now, quiet, global, and hidden in plain sight, what does justice even look like? Do you think figures like these are outliers, or prototypes of what's coming? Let us know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive into the underworld. One last question to leave you thinking. If you had to stop one, Bout with his weapons, or Joumaa with his money, who would you choose, and why?